Awesome. So as I said before, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Pillar 5 Advisory Committee meeting. Our topic today is on school leaders, and just wanted to give a wonderful shout out to our wonderful guests joining us today. I'm going to kick it off to Rachel to do the intro landscape on this topic.
Awesome. I am so excited to see everybody here tonight on this stormy July evening. It looks like I've got an echo for a quick second. Let me find where that's coming from. Okay, fix that. All right, I am Rachel Amsitz, the policy director here at the AIB, and we're super excited to have such a great panel here for the middle of July. We did not anticipate as great a response as we got, but we are super excited to have so many people from around the state. Literally every region is here, it looks like, and we're really excited to engage into tonight's conversation. Everything that we do surrounds what you see on the slide here about the blueprint being the unprecedented investment into Maryland's education system that really serves all of our students, and our goal to ensure that every single student leaves our public schools prepared for success in college, career, and life. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Today, you're going to see that we've got two different topics that are in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan that we are digging into with folks who are holding and doing the work right now as assistant principals and principals. So we just wanted to open today with why National Board, why we're talking about National Board tonight, and why it's even in the Blueprint in terms of a requirement for principals. And so let's see. The blueprint does envision a transformation of the role of principals, that it believes that principals do know their student, staff, and communities best, and they know what they need to be successful, and that every student deserves and needs instructional leaders, and that the principal's leading that work of the instructional vision for the school. Holding National Board does reflect and strengthen the vision of a principal as the instructional leader in the building. And the principal sets the vision for what high quality teaching looks like, how staff intervene and support students, the next steps for school improvement that lead to the collective efficacy and ultimately improved outcomes for students. As the career ladder for teachers expands, principals will continue to serve as that instructional leader, and we'll start to see even more teacher leaders in every building, with the vision that principals coordinate the work leading to collective efficacy. We have some slides at the end of the conversation to be able to talk to how does a principal or an assistant principal even get nationally board certified in the role while they're serving as a assistant principal or principal. But given the response tonight, and 8 or 9 panelists, we really wanted to guard the time for those who've agreed to join us. So actually, Mr. Luz, I'm going to pass it back to you to get started with the panel conversation.
Sounds good. All right. So just wanted to introduce our panelists. We have 9 scheduled to be here. There might be 1 or 2 coming in a little later, running a little late, but just wanted to introduce everyone. And here's an attached map to show where they are coming from. So first off, we have Dr. Sandy Caluzzi. She is currently a half-time literacy coach and half-time academic interventionist at the Broadford Elementary in Garrett County, and she has former experience as an assistant principal. Next up, we have Miss Brittany Love Campbell. She's a principal at Gaithersburg High School in Montgomery County. Next up, we have Dr. Sarah Sergo. She is the Chief of Staff in Frederick County Public Schools, oversees human resources, and serves as the Frederick County Blueprint Implementation Coordinator. She is also a former principal, receiving numerous accolades, such as being the National Board Certified Principal of the Year for her support of the program in her school. Fourth from our wonderful committee here as well, Michael Brown. He is the principal at Wild Lake High School in Howard County, and he's the past president of the MASSP, which is the Maryland State Association of Secondary School Principals. Next up, we have Dr. LaKenya Southern. She's a principal at Lake Arbor Elementary in Prince George's County. We have Dr. Lesma Watkis, an assistant principal at CMIT Elementary Charter South in PG County. We have Miss Julie. She's an assistant principal at Langley Park McCormick Elementary School in PG County. We have Mrs. Necessary. She is a principal at Lockerman Middle School in Caroline County. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sonia Matthew. She is an assistant principal at Mary B. Neal Elementary in Charles County, and she was named and recognized as a MAESP NAESP Outstanding Principal at the most recent MSD State Board meeting last month. So thank you everyone, panelists, for joining us here today. I just want to give you guys the rundown of all the questions to come, because I know this is a very big topic. There can be a lot of different sides, perspectives. I want to make sure we hear all those perspectives. So as you're just reading these on your own, um, we're going to first talk about some of the benefits of assistant principals having National Board certified, also additional supports that may be needed to achieve certification. We'll then go into the assistant principals, about that 20% time in the blueprint language of how that's being used and engaging in classroom activities at the school. I do know question 5, the one at the very end, you'll get a chance to speak about anything that we did not get a chance to, surrounding today's topic. Just want to make sure that we had open dialogue, all sides regarding this topic. So every question, I know we have 8, 9 panelists today, so it's okay if not everyone shares every single question. Just whichever questions you feel comfortable, we'd love to hear your voice. But the first question we have today at the very top is I want every single panelist here to share is blueprint related or not, just in your current role and position, what do you love most about your job? And anyone can start us off.
I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Sonia Matthew. Hey everyone, Charles County. Good to see everyone. So the best thing about my work is really being able to be in the classrooms, even when we think about assistant principals being the disciplinarians. When we are focused on instruction and we're building relationships with our teachers, we're able to be in those classrooms freely and really shift how we do discipline, which gives us time for that instruction. So that's what I enjoy best about my role. Thank you.
I'll jump in. I think one of the most beautiful things about doing what I do every day as a building level educator is, an impact that you can have every day on the lives of people. Sometimes you take that for granted, to be able to wake up every day with a purpose and be able to actualize that purpose every single day. Even now during the summertime, a lot of people think about their jobs and it's kind of a downer for me to be able to wake up and have ideas about things that I want to do, to be able to move people, to be able to make the lives of individuals better, and to be able to have an impact on that next generation of people. For me, there is nothing better than doing that. Like you said, any frustrations that I have with my job comes out of wanting to do the best for students and the people that I serve. So that's what I have for you.
I would second that. I think that it's really about relationships, and being a building principal allows me to have those relationships with students and adults. I love that I get to support teachers in this role, and students, and even parents and families, and just being able to leverage those relationships to have a positive impact on the community is really what keeps me going in this role.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Julie Huey, and I would say the thing that drives me the most, what I really love about my job, is just seeing the growth in people, whether that is students, staff, or even families or parents that we service. Seeing how they develop over time, given the services that we offer, as well as the instructional support that we're giving, and how that really impacts students, and we see them as they move on throughout our building. Most of our students tend to stay with us from pre-K all the way through 5th grade. So it's just great to see them as they grow throughout that process.
Hello, I would like to add to what my PGCPS colleague, Ms. Huey, stated. And I like seeing people, students, staff, parents, the growth, but thinking about how, and bringing in what people said before, how did that relationship, how was I able to leverage the relationship in supporting that growth? I'm a super extrovert. I love dealing with people, and that's part of the reason why I think I'm in this profession, but there's always the reluctant teacher, the reluctant parent, the reluctant student who isn't necessarily all the way invested, but because of the relationship you have with them, they're willing to take the dive and in seeing them see that that outcome on the back end, that it was positive. I think that's what I love about my job.
I'll jump in. So it looks like among the group, I might be the only sort of cabinet level person. So I think sort of from where I sit, I love most about my job the opportunity to sort of move the organization in a direction that affects positively large groups of employees at the same time. And so the opportunity to, whether it be through bargaining, whether it be through operating procedures, whether it's through creation of documents or resources or materials, sort of the ability to hear what an issue is and respond and react to that issue very deliberately and quickly is really powerful. And you have to yield that power carefully. But it's a wonderful opportunity to sort of make system-wide organizational change.
I'll go next. I love most about my job that I get the best of both worlds. I get to spend my morning teaching kids, and I spend my afternoons working with teachers and coaching teachers. I really love that I get to practice what I preach and get to teach that in the morning and then coach that in the afternoon. I really like working with new teachers. That's my favorite part of being a coach. And I really like working with the littlest learners in our school, pre-K through first grade.
All right, thank you all. Before we move on, just want to make sure, thank you to the 7 panelists that shared so far. Just wanted to make sure Dr. Watkis or Miss Brittany Love Campbell, are you guys in the Zoom right now? Otherwise, we'll move on. All right, they're not currently with us right now. We'll continue to move on. Before we move on, Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Robinson. I am a member of the Accountability and Implementation Board, but I'm also a National Board Certified Teacher. I work in Prince George's County Public Schools, and where I'm a numeracy coach. So kind of similar to one of the people who just shared, I think it was Sandy, maybe. So I teach a class in the morning, and then I coach people after that. So that's kind of like the best part of my job as well, getting to see to do the fun part, working with the kids, and then practice what I preach with my first and second year teachers after that. So when I heard about this topic in the absence of Member Stapleton, I just felt like I really wanted to be here for this topic. So I'm anxious to hear what you all have to share. I normally support Pillar 2 work, and this is very much kind of related to that as well. So I just wanted to be here for that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin, and thanks again, panelists, for being here today. All right, the first question we have on deck today is, what do you feel are the benefits of having a principal who is also National Board certified? How does it impact your staff and ultimately your students? And then I have the blueprint language copied and pasted on the bottom half there. Anyone can start us off, and yep.
Well, I'll jump in if that's to help get us moving.
Go ahead.
So I have really complicated feelings about this, and I think Rachel's heard me share it more than once, but I want to start by answering your question, which is that I believe that the blueprint has used NBC to create a really important through line around instructional leadership, right? So I recognize that the intent of the law is to sort of, I think, and not to like sort of nerd out, but when I did my dissertation on effective principal leadership, what the research says, going all the way back to like Leith Wood in the early 2000s, is that second to classroom instruction, principal leadership is the second most important driver of school improvement. So I completely agree that having strong instructional leadership and strong classroom instruction together is what will motivate and sort of accelerate results across the state. The complicated part of that is that I don't actually think NBC is the right measure. And I feel that NBC is an outstanding tool. It's a way for teachers, it professionalizes our teachers as sort of as a measure of teacher quality. And I'm using the word quality, not effectiveness, because I think there are differences. And so the challenge is that NBC is not a measure of leadership skills. And, in the state of Maryland, you have to become admin 1 or 2 certified. You have to complete a certification program to do that. You have to pass an exam. There are measures that incorporate a lot of those principles. And so for me and for us locally, and I'm imagining, I think even I know the state association feels similar to what I'm sharing. I think there are important mechanisms that we have to use to elevate the profession, but I don't support NBC as a measure of principal quality and effectiveness. And so maybe that's sort of a little bit of a mic drop to start with, but I think there are benefits to having strong instructional leadership in a school. I don't believe that NBC is the appropriate tool to make that determination. And so that's sort of the impact on staff and our students, is because I think it will have an adverse effect on people going into the pipeline of being an administrator. And I think there are some unintended consequences that we have to consider. So that's sort of where I come from.
No, I appreciate Dr. Sergo for being open and transparent about that. Thank you.
I wanted to, I guess, add my lens. I definitely hear what you're saying, Dr. Sergo, about the NBCT not necessarily being a measure of leadership. I totally agree with that. I think for me, and I guess this just might be my worldview, I've always, even in administration, I've always seen myself as a teacher. And I tell people that frequently. I am a teacher with an administrator's credential. And I have a teaching certificate. So at the heart of what I do, I am a teacher. It's just that now my students are teachers and staff members. And so with being that said, I try to leverage my NBCT to develop empathy and understanding with my instructional staff, helping them understand, okay, although I am your administrator, I understand, I get it in some instances. And in some instances, I can be very vulnerable in saying, I don't get what it's like to teach a kindergartner post-COVID, right? So really being transparent and authentic with them about how I identify myself as a teacher, but then in seeing that also being able to hold them to a higher standard or a high standard of excellence as it relates to constructivist teaching and eliciting critical thinking skills and being a reflective practitioner, which are some of the tenets of the National Board certification process. And then additionally, encouraging other administrative friends of mine to, consider going through the process, even as an administrator, because it literally gives you a different lens. And so that's my input.
I'd like to say I agree that there are probably some other measures that would better, determine leadership effectiveness. I will say when I started thinking about this question ahead of time, I feel that as a National Board Certified teacher and a principal, one thing that I've been able to leverage by going through the National Board journey is it gave me sort of like some instant credibility with my teaching staff who was also exploring or in some place on their own journey to becoming National Board Certified. I didn't have to work to earn that credibility because I had been through the process, and because maintenance certification requires you to actually get some face time in a classroom and have some teaching time, I feel that it does give me an outlet to maintain a pulse on what it is like to teach in a classroom currently. Not that it's the same thing as, if I was teaching every day a full caseload of students, but it gives me a little bit of a pulse on that. And I think that has helped me to support teachers in their journey and just to sort of add some credibility to myself as an instructional leader, because I'm still maintaining that instructional piece of it. But I think that the initial comment that was made really speaks to what I find to be sort of contradictory in all of this. And it's really not about Blueprint or National Board Certification, but it's just there's a lot of varying demands on building leaders' time. And so, you think about there's probably different measures to look at effectiveness and what makes a strong instructional leader because there's so many different demands on our time. And when I look at just this little lane of instructional leadership and how does National Board Certification allow me to have a little bit more influence on that, there's definitely benefits. But I don't know if I was coming into this role not having the certification and had to pursue it in this role, I might feel differently. I think I have a leg up because I became National Board Certified as a classroom teacher, and I've just been able to maintain that as an administrator.
I'm going to jump in. I love the conversation. I love kind of the almost like the dissonance when it comes to instructional leadership, school management, the research around principal leadership being the second or the main indicator. I think you said, Dr. Sergo, right? The number one indicator. And my understanding is really the affect of the teacher and the instructional leadership of the teacher. And in order for us to really cultivate that, and I love the credibility aspect, we have to have leaders who understand that process of deep teaching and learning, pedagogy, best practices, evidence-based practices, before, during, after, and even after again, because it is such a reflective process. And so going through it until I think Dr. Southern alluded to this, until you have actually gone through it, it's very hard to really understand what it looks like, feels like, and who you are as a leader practitioner. So I would, and I really want to get two sides of it, and I'm not a principal, so that's another area in my reflection of understanding this through my lens. However, I am interacting with students and teachers quite a lot. And my initial point of the discipline being really our main time taker in our work. We do a lot of discipline of students, and we really have to turn that to its head and think about instruction and what is quality instruction and how do we set that up. And if our instructional leaders, our principals don't have that in the gold standard of National Board Certification, then they are not in my opinion, the absolute best for our teachers who are now the absolute best for our scholars.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. I think from the principal lens, as someone who does not have that particular certification, I think in practice, when potential lawmakers and we put things together, things they sound sexy, they sound nice. Having a principal who is nationally board certified sounds fantastic. Nobody is going to argue that, because if you argue that, that means that myself and other principals aren't focused on instruction. We're not instructional leaders. However, there are large portions that are missing, and like Dr. Sergio said, you have to take everything into account when you are coming up with something that is as broad as saying, principals being nationally board certified. That's a very broad brush, right? That includes community schools, that includes schools that are at the very top, they're blue ribbon, all the way down at the very bottom, urban, suburban, rural. We're talking about everyone. However, that is a very different scope when you were talking about different leaders, different schools, and what those communities and what those schools need. out of those instructional leaders. So you could come up with something and say that sounds fair across the board for everybody to, have to do that, but it's not taking into account the time. And like Dr. Matthews said, the time that it takes for us to involve ourselves, depending on your school and your demographics, what your day and what you're really immersed in. And like I said, there are some school leaders, God bless them. It's not the school that I'm currently at, that majority of the day you can just focus at. Matter of fact, there are schools where you teach in a class, you can actually make that happen as a school leader because there are no discipline issues or very little at those particular schools. I believe every school district has at least a couple of those schools within their school district, and you probably talk to some of those colleagues and dream, some of us that are high need schools, of what that actually looks like, right? So that sounds perfect. But for the majority of schools in Maryland and around the country, that just to me sounds like a dream scenario instead of what something that is practical for our school leaders to attain. And I agree again with Dr. Sergio that that measure that we're using to say that a school leader is effective or not, I mean, I have huge issues with that. Even on the side of saying good teachers, right? Because that's initially what it's being used for, is to say who's a good teacher or who's mastered the level of teaching. I also have an argument with that as well. So, but on practice, it all sounds very, very good.
When I think of the aspect of instructional leadership, and I think back to what Dr. Matthews said, I do think there is a depth of pedagogy that teachers who've undergone the National Board certification process go through. And I think as an instructional leader, it is important to have that depth of knowledge, but also going into that depth of instruction. And I think as leaders, if we are trying to grow our educators, though that is going to be a very important step, just to have that. And going through the reflective process, I think, is very important. Though we do understand that instructional leadership is one aspect of leadership, and that there are many other aspects of leadership that are important. And so National Board certification, I think, would just benefit any administrator and really impact the students because of the depth of the instruction that the leader would be growing their teachers in. But I also think, as was stated with many, that there are other aspects of leadership that are just as important, and that there are other measures that we have to take into account.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. We're on the first question. Just for time purposes, making sure we get to all the rest of the questions, I'm going to move on to question 2, which we kind of got to a little bit already, but just wanted to directly ask. So as we talked about from question 1, I know people said how, being a principal who came in as a teacher first, achieving National Board, then becoming a principal is different if it's a principal who now has to achieve certification. And, as a teacher myself who just recently got certified this past December, I know it takes a lot of time. So question 2 is asking, what supports will be needed to help principals achieve NBC, especially those who don't currently have that? And then also the second part of the question we can get to is, what feedback, comments, suggestions do you potentially have for the waiver process? I'll stick with that.
I'm going to jump in just the journey of National Board certification is just that. It is a process. So really understanding, helping our principals understand that it's not just a test that they take. It is different from anything that they would possibly assume. We don't know what the current mindset is with regards to what is the process. So there's narratives out there about that the process is difficult, it's assumptions or opinions. I think it's important to really examine the architecture of good teaching, the core propositions, what exactly are these standards? Like, what does this mean? And to know that it is a process for many of us here who are NBCTs, it's a continuum. Some may have completed the process in a year, others may have been all the way like me, 5 years. And I embrace that process because if we are going to say very boldly that principals are instructional leaders, that needs to be defined. And if we are defining instructional leadership as that, then we have a set of standards that fit seamlessly. If we say that principals are instructional leaders and these types of leaders and etc. So our definition has to be clear. The standards must be spelled out. And I would argue that if we do that, if we are calling ourselves instructional leaders as principals in what and how we message ourselves and what we actually have documented as principals being instructional leaders, then my wondering would be, what are the standards that support said definition?
Just to sort of jump in, I hope we can bring the conversation into a little bit more balance, because it feels like we're emphasizing instructional leadership at a cost to the full portrait of what it means to be a school-based administrator. And so if you're, when I hear this idea about standards, this isn't sort of like a counter to what you said, just to sort of more to push into the conversation. The standards that exist are the PSEL, the Professional Standards for Educational Leadership. There are 10 of them. And in the 10 standards, 4 of them directly cover the notion of instructional leadership. Standard 4, which is around curriculum. Standard 6, which is on building the capacity of your personnel, because having an NBC doesn't make you able to coach, mentor, give feedback, and improve the instruction of others, right? So that's a whole leadership skill set. And Standard 10, which is school improvement. So sort of I would submit that we have robust evaluation standards across the state using the PSEL as the anchor that elevate instructional leadership as a core requisite skill to be effective. And I just think that the challenge is it feels like the way that the law is written, not the conversation of our committee, sort of situates instructional leadership in a disproportionate way when you look at the full understanding. My background is not as a classroom teacher. I was a highly effective principal. I won awards. I had the highest number of NBC staff in the entire county at the time when I was in Montgomery County at the time. I really support NBC. The challenge is sort of how do you honor the current structure and function of how we elevate instructional leadership. But specific to the waiver process, the last draft that I saw, I actually thought was quite good. I think it was very, it really honored the idea of holding harmless people who are currently in the jobs. It really gave districts pathways to exceptions, because the reality is none of us have enough NBC teachers to, first of all, want to become administrators, and then two, sort of fill these roles. So there was waivers around if you don't have any NBC applicants, there's sort of a waiver allowed. But I do think it's important to really think about the reality of our pipeline and sort of how we can sort of continue to elevate instructional leadership, bring the credibility. But I really would submit that you can have all of those same things and not be NBC. And my last comment would be, I had a wonderful cohort of NBC teachers when I was a principal, but I would not look you in the face and tell you that all of them were my most effective teachers. And I also wouldn't say that some of them were principal or even assistant principal ready. So I just think we need to pull these two concepts apart just a little bit more, because we're drawing a correlation that I'm not sure is supported by the research yet.
I think an interesting point when I initially certified as a teacher, at the time, National Board had options to become certified as an administrator or a building leader. And it was evaluated using different criteria than what the teaching certification was. So National Board made a shift and you no longer can become certified as an administrator. It's all about classroom teaching, which I think was intentional. But it's interesting because they made a shift, but we're trying to take this National Board teacher certification and equate it to something that is going to predict or predetermine a leader's effectiveness. So I think that that just supports what you were referring to as far as the isolation of that instructional leadership component versus all the things that we do navigate and juggle as building leaders, not just instructional leaders. I think that in order for current principals to pursue pathways to National Board certification, there needs to be flexibility in our job responsibilities, in scheduling constraints that are going to allow principals to see this not for compliance, but more for there's going to be some positive impact to our school buildings because of it. The way that it is structured, the way our job responsibilities and our school schedules are structured right now, and our personnel is funded right now, for me, as somebody who has a certification already, and I'm just trying to figure out how to continue to maintain that and only look at two components versus somebody who's coming in and has to do all four. I foresee people who have to do this and meet all four components fresh. It's going to be more about compliance. And then I don't know that it's a worthwhile investment in anybody's time or energy or funding.
I would have to agree with Ms. Necessary in the flexibility that would be needed in what the job responsibilities would require at that time. I also think it would be very important for there to be a clear understanding for principals of how does the National Board certification process clearly align to their current roles and what they're doing. And so when I think of the PESO standards, I think it's important or would be important to have kind of a crosswalk to see how do these PESO standards really align with the core propositions as well as the standards, depending on what standards and what certification area someone would go for. But how do they align with what they are currently doing, or how does that align with the National Board process? Because I think if they have a clear understanding of a crosswalk that details that, then there would be a better, they could at least attempt the process in a more clear way without trying to figure it out so much as they're going through the process.
I agree with that as well. Whenever I obtained certification, I was in the classroom, and then whenever I needed to do MOC, I was an assistant principal at the time, and it was really hard to find that flexibility because I was in one of those schools where we had a lot of discipline, and my principal supported me as best she could, but then there were some days when I just couldn't be with my intervention group of students to work with them. Another piece to that too is having a support to help a principal or an assistant principal figure out what does it look like whenever you do those four components. Which class or classes are you going to work with and why? And just being purposeful with all of those choices. Whenever I did MOC, I ended up working with a teacher who was on an improvement plan, but that didn't really present itself until January. So then I was, in another mode of panic, like, oh my goodness, I need to like hurry up and get my MOC figured out and done. I mean, I know the deadline's not until May, but that's just another piece to it as well.
Sorry, Dr. Sandy, can you explain what MOC is for those who might not know?
Maintenance of certification. Every 5 years, you need to continue to maintain your National Board status by completing maintenance of certification, which is 2 components rather than 4 components for the initial certification process.
And the MOC, just for anyone who may not know, is not as rigorous as the initial certification. So there's actually data to back that up. Just wondering about, speaking of data, and I haven't looked at the research, I'm assuming that the studies around principal who are MBCTs and the effect on the outcomes of student learning and teacher proficiency is not as much. Dr. Sergo, I don't know what that looks like. If you have any,
I'm not aware of there being any.
so it is still a new area. And I know that you mentioned that you had teachers in your building who, from your observations, were not as successful as the others. So I just think about that data piece. That's just a wondering. And I also think about John Hattie's work and his, without, and not only his work, but, and he is, you know, the researcher who has studied other researchers, to conclude that instructional leadership is the absolute main determinant of our student growth and success, which then relates to, again, to your point, teacher instructional leadership in the classroom, right? Or instructional.
I just want to make a correction. So John Hattie's
Sure.
research is on effect size. I did not reference John Hattie. He did not produce any data that I'm aware of stating what you said. I was referencing research by Leithwood, which others have built up. Just to be clear, it was not referencing John Hattie's effect.
Absolutely, yes. And that was just the first one who came to my mind. But I do know that
Yeah.
research specifically does give that information with regards to instructional leadership. And I also, going back to Julie's point, I wonder also with the crosswalk, the PSEL standards are not, they're listed, right? They're listed. There's the breadth and depth when it comes to instructional leadership is just not there. So as we think about doing a crosswalk, I think that's great because we will see the limitations and we will be able to really dig deep into what those limitations are and in regards to the instructional components, right? Because if we were to, as principals, assistant principals, if we were, and we ought to measure the time, what are we using our time for in the course of a school day? It's instruction, right? It's coaching, developing our teacher leaders, our instructional leadership team, our admin team to now be able to have that capacity to then grow our teachers. That is the heart of our work. So while I agree that principles and the PSEL standards have other components, it just takes us back to the silo effect of what the roles are of principals and maybe, and you know, the idea what I'm thinking about is management versus leadership. And going back to my initial point as an assistant principal, because I'm not able, if I don't have that instructional understanding to the depth and breadth and the constant reflection, then I'm going back to, I'm the disciplinarian. Because the spirit of being a lifelong learner was really cultivated in me when I became a national board certified teacher. Hearing the voices of national board certified teachers who have been in the admin role, whether that is an assistant principal or a principal, and really examining their success. So that means, how is that assistant principal, in my case, using his or her time to develop teachers? And how has she or he been able to do that if discipline takes up, we can fairly say, 75, maybe, and like to Dr. Michael Brown's point, depending on your school. But if our mindset is one where it is all about instructional leadership and we can go back to the core propositions, then we have now adopted a type of mindset that gives us the absolute best leadership moves in our respective schools. And the last thing I will say, everything I do is guided by the 5 core propositions, even as an administrator. That is really my lens when I'm interacting with my students, with my teachers, and my other stakeholders. So I really appreciate just being able to tell my story, even though my journey was very hard. That is truly what makes us better as administrators and leaders.
I don't know how much.
Follow. Oh, go ahead. Who's?
This is Miss Southern. I just very quickly, as it relates to what supports that principals would need to achieve, I think there would be a lot. We should, or districts should, or LEAs should be intentional about creating cohorts for administrators of other colleagues that are administrators as they are going through the journey. We've seen, particularly since COVID, that the cohort model in education, just in general in adult education, is very effective. I just went through one myself and don't think that I would have been able to complete it without having it. The administrator role is very lonely, period, particularly in the principal's seat. And having a group of people who can help support your learning and also encourage you and give you, there's a level of mental, social, emotional safety within a cohort model that you can get as well too. And so with this journey being just unique in general, because it is an administrator journey as opposed to a teacher journey, I think that districts would be well versed, or they should really think hard and long about ensuring that cohort models are available for administrators who decide they want to go through the process.
You made me think of something that I think what we're going to face is a messaging issue. So I think you have a large majority of people who do not believe that NBC should be a requirement to be a principal. So you're going to have to convince people who want to be principals to do it for the right reasons. And I think you elevated some of the caution around that, right? Like that people will go and do it, but they'll not do it for the spirit of reflective growth and deepening your instruction. They're going to do it for another end game. So I think number one, there's an issue of messaging, but I'll just put the elephant in the room. The larger issue is there's no money that comes with it. And so, you have an issue here where people get an additional $10,000 if they're in a role that they are directly serving kids and they have their NBC. They will not get those monies when they switch into the administrator unit. And so, it seems simple to say that school systems should just bargain something. And there are some school systems, larger ones, that have found ways to do that. But the vast majority of school systems in the state do not have the budget or funding that you find in the Big Four. And so that's not a possibility for them. And when you start to layer on top increasing numbers of NBC, the local share, you have to look at cost equalization, sort of what the wealth equalization costs a school system. We're 50-50. Other districts rely heavily on the state. Others get very little from the state. But when there's no monies coming to the administrator role for having NBC, that's another messaging issue. So I just think that's important for this from a practical perspective, convincing people it's worthwhile after they've gotten their admin cert and they've gotten their master's degree and they've done all these things, why they should go and do this again or do something additional. And then two, the fact that they don't get the financial incentives across the state. You may bargain something locally, but the state is not giving you a state share of that. And so those are some real, frankly, significant issues that are becoming bargaining conversations to consider.
All right. Thank you all so much for question 2. Sorry, for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to question 3. But before we move on to question 3, I just want to give a space and opportunity for anyone who is not a panelist to ask any questions, thoughts, comments, feedback.
Can you all hear me? Hi, so my name is Crystalline. I'm an adjunct professor at Morgan State, I also used to teach in Baltimore City for about a decade, and I am national board certified. And one of the first things that came to my head was, as somebody who used to work with Project Uplift, and we tried to get more multicultural teachers certified for national board. One of the first things that came to my head is like, oh, once this like current crop of administrators leave, and we're looking for the next crop to kind of take their place, there's going to be a very top heavy like lack of representation. So like from the top down, you're going to have a lot more principals who don't look like me, especially since I was the only person certified in Baltimore City in my content area for my age group in the entire district, let alone one of the few Black people who was nationally certified in Baltimore City. So it just kind of like brought that up in my head as well. But I also don't want us to forget that there is a waiver. And so just like our certification process has changed for teachers in Baltimore, in Maryland, where there's a portfolio as well as the test option. I think just knowing that now there's also this waiver option plus the National Board Certification test, that would be something that people would want to use. But again, it's just something that came to my head as you all were discussing, but I do think that it's a great topic. Thank you.
Hi, this is Heather Clayball. I'm the Associate Superintendent of Fiscal Services for Frederick County Public Schools. And one of the challenges that we've been facing with our board is having data to back up what they're seeing as a very large investment in NBC. And, you know, I think what they're looking for is peer-reviewed data. And I think before they're going to be willing to invest in the administrators, carrying the $10,000 over to administrators, they would have to see data to prove the effectiveness and how that's going to change their principals who are currently effective and meeting the PSEL standard. And I will say, I appreciate, and of course, I'm in full recognition that Dr. Sergo and I are on the same leadership team. So I appreciate her mentioning some things that are what I live and breathe daily in regards to funding. And I think we are in a time frame, given some of the things that are happening at the federal level, as well as this, which will always trickle down to the state level, where what we are going to be able to afford is going to continue to be constrained. And frankly, for a new teacher for me with benefits is about $85,000. So that's 9 NBCs. So, you know, if I have to present to my board a budget to increase an NBC budget or add, you know, several teachers to the school district where we have already increased our class size, and our board is incredibly regretful of having to make that decision, that becomes the question that they ask me. And without concrete data to back it up, they're always going to choose attempting to decrease our class size.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else before we move on to question 3 for our panelists? All right, moving on. We're shifting a little bit, talking about the assistant principal role specifically. So question 3 here is, how are assistant principals engaging in classroom activities at your school, and how are they being supported / empowered to do so, especially in content areas outside their expertise? So I have the blueprint language copied and pasted there below. The part highlighted in green where it says an assistant principal shall participate in classroom activity involving direct interactions with students for at least 20% of their working hours.
Well, I actually think this is really important and support the premise. I remember when I was a principal, and I want to be clear, I've been out of the principalship more than a decade, but when I was the principal, I remember one of my assistant principals saying to me, talking with colleagues, like how some of them spent like 3 hours a day doing lunch duty or doing discipline. And I thought it was really important that my assistant principals be focused as much on instruction as I was. I gave them grade level teams that they were responsible for. They had full responsibilities for data monitoring, observations, feedback, all of that. So I realized this is a real problem that we have got to try to solve, because we're not preparing people for the principalship if we don't give them any time to stay connected to the instructional part of being a good leader. So I just sort of think that's important. The challenge is that I think the idea of quantifying that to me is a little complicated. So I get stuck a little bit on the idea of quantifying that, because I'm sure, as Sonia would probably agree, she has no 2 days that are the same. And so sort of sort of the same idea of the 60-40. It's like, I think when we try to quantify these things, it becomes complicated. But I also feel like we need to maybe, I almost, if I could wordsmith this, I would actually say, instead of participate in classroom activity involving direct interactions with students, because I just don't, again, I don't think that's operationally going to be consistent across the state, would be that they spend, some significant portion of their time engaged in instructionally related tasks and activities. And to me, like, that's the premise of this. I think the wording is a little bit misguided. And so I would just say that we want them to have instructional impact. We want them to stay close to instruction. I think the language of this is just a little bit of a misalignment with that interest and creates some undue hardship in actually implementation.
Dr. Sergo, I definitely agree with the 20%. That's very, it makes it almost just like you have to get to that 20%. So that's my goal. And it should be really more holistic. For me, going back to my initial point about discipline, I believe we need to be really adaptive with those, like what it is that's causing the behavior. And we'll go back to those 5 core propositions, really being committed to our students, committed to their learning, knowing their subjects, knowing how to teach their subjects. And so those are the drivers of how we do our work as assistant principals, managing them, monitoring our students, thinking systemically, thinking and knowing about the learning process. Like, these are the tenets. These are like really, again, what guide our work as MBCTs. So it's really natural after going through the process, right? So I'm in classrooms a lot, and that is because of just how I reflect to do things differently. And again, that goes back to that mindset that you, after going through this experience, this professional learning, professional development experience, it becomes who you are.
Yeah, let me say, I had the opportunity as assistant principal in Baltimore City Public Schools. I was there for 16 years. One of my last assignments, and my principal at the time was probably, it seems to be way ahead of her time. She was so much into instructional leadership that everybody on the instructional team or on the leadership team had to teach a class. So I actually taught an 8th grade class for a couple of years. And what I found through that process was, that's why I can speak so freely about this, is again, in certain schools, you're really doing the kids more of a disservice than you are a service. Because yes, when I was in the classroom, everything was fantastic. Kids were learning. I loved being in the classroom. However, your duties and responsibilities as an administrator don't stop. So it wasn't as though Baltimore City was like, you know what, you guys are doing a great thing. Let's give you guys 2 more, or give you guys some more money so you can do this, at a higher rate. That wasn't the case. So we still had to do our regular jobs, meaning an angry parent comes in, I have to step out of the room to be able to deal with the things that nobody else in the building was able to deal with at that particular moment in time. So then the things I said early on that I love to do, the reasons why I love to do this job, is to help kids get from one place to another. I found that very difficult, even so that I had children telling me, Mr. Brown, you're not here Like we want to do X, Y, and Z that we were doing on Monday. We want to further our learning. We couldn't do that. More importantly, I found that once it was time for those eighth graders to move on to high school, I felt like I did not prepare some of them properly because some of them were going to some of the magnet schools in Baltimore City where I knew they were going to be challenged at a higher level. And it was my job to get them ready. But my job as assistant principal really, really came in the way. So I will say that um, without our LEAs and the state giving LEAs additional funding beyond what you may already be receiving to restructure things at the school-based level, meaning that um, if you want to be able to have a focus on instruction, then you have to eliminate the distractions so that there can be a focus in on the instructions. So if you're hearing from administrators that, hey, look, discipline is a distraction for me to focus in on instruction, then I guess the thing that we have to focus in on is how do we eliminate that? And can we do that with the funding that we already have? From the Howard County perspective, I know that answer is a resounding no, because we've had to go through cuts the last 2 consecutive years, right? It may be 3. I don't know. But I think that it is very difficult to say that you can do, again, another broad thing, and you want to put that out there, and that's fine. And the language, and again, it looks great, but our systems and our processes and our structure would have to significantly change, in my opinion, in order to make this work the way that it should work for children. For children.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. For the sake of time, I know question 4 kind of tied into question 3, so I'm going to skip that question. It's what additional support is needed for APs to make time for this work. I want to jump to our last question just to offer every panelist, if you choose, to say anything, talk about anything related to this topic that you did not get a chance to earlier.
I think something that I hope that I don't know, sort of, I shared this with you that before we came, this to me is very much a pillar 2 conversation. So candidly, I'm still slightly confused as to how it sits in pillar 5, but assuming it's about stakeholder engagement and it's about resource allocation, I would really want to build upon what Michael just shared, which is, the messaging about these items and the funding and the resource allocation associated to make these come to fruition. I think we can't keep having conversations about incentivizing things monetarily and not reconcile the fact that we have no money. So I think, there's something that pillar 5, and I really want to build on what Crystalline said. I have grown increasingly concerned about some of these mandates and their impact on our historically marginalized groups of potential and current employees. And I'm growing increasingly concerned about that. So I think sort of from a pillar 5 perspective, those are places. I hope that I'm glad that I think Justin is here to carry this through to the pillar 2. I think the spirit of what we're talking about is important. But to me, this is no different than when I was a director of schools and I supervised principals. And I would say to a principal, I'd go in their school and I'd say, so what's your school improvement plan this year? And if any one of them said to me, well, I'm still working on the goals that I had 5 years ago, those seem to still be a good fit, I would be like, I'd be incredulous. I'd say that's absurd. And so I think that the spirit of these parts of the statute, the core proposition around elevating instructional leadership, around ensuring that our assistant principals spend time in classrooms supporting teaching and learning, we must hold on to those. But I do not think we quite have the right language to get there. And so I do hope that the Pillar 2 committee and the influence of this group will help to refine, not abandon the interest, but refine the language so that it is achievable, so that it is actionable, and so that it makes sense for where we are in 2026 and beyond.
I wanted to say something like touching on that money aspect. So whenever you look at teachers who have national board certification and they're making that extra 10,000, and then once they get their MOC or in a low achieving school, all that extra money, they could eventually get to the point where they're making more than the principal or the assistant principal. That's one of the reasons why I'm not an assistant principal anymore. And the person who just took my job, I'm making more money than she is now. And she is a national board certified teacher and lost her incentive. So I just think that whenever Maryland has said that they want to put this out there, that they want all teachers to have the certification, I think it's because they want to make it so that people stay in the classroom longer. There's not really an incentive for national board certified teachers wanting to be an administrator because of the money that's attached to it.
I wanted to also, I guess, tie in with what everyone is saying. I guess another thread that can be explored is looking at where our workforce is generationally and determining what their values are. If we're talking about future perspective principals, future perspective administrators, those aren't those Gen Xers like me who are willing to just do the work for little to no money. And so if and it is a rigorous process. And so how do you marry the expectations of this extended process with what the values are of this up and coming, the current crop of leaders primarily are millennials, and then the zennials are right behind them. They will be coming right behind them. And so how do we, if this expectation of this type of process is legislated into, how is that sustainable? I guess that's I guess what everyone is asking, but just in different ways. How is it sustainable beyond maybe like the next 5 years, the next MOC bandwidth of period? Because I can't see with the teachers that are in my building, I don't, some of them are interested, but even like my new assistant principal, who is a millennial, she's kind of like, why do I want to do that? So it's I think the thinking was good. I guess I would want to get back to the why behind it, the original why behind it, and then kind of making adjustments based on who we actually have in the workforce right now.
Thank you.
I gotta say one last thing before we move forward. Like, I think one of the things that weighs really heavy with me was particularly with this part of the blueprint is it's evident that there wasn't a school-based leader that was involved in this. And so it's clear, because if you did, I think there would have been some feedback that would have been given in real time to alter the language as you see it right now today. That leadership pipeline is so dire right now that I don't think people are really discussing it nationally like they really should. I mean, there are some articles and things like that that have come out, but it is way more dire than that because of the demands of the job. And now you are putting things in practice where teachers are outpacing school leaders monetarily. That not only is problematic, but it is also an issue when you talk about school leaders being respected in their profession for what they do each and every day. And that used to never be the case in education. School leaders were some of the most respected and at the top of the pendulum. And now that is no longer the case. So you're in a building with individuals who outpace you. Yeah, that's a huge issue when it comes to trying to, like I said, change the hearts and minds of people for the sake of children. That is hard to do when you have individuals who, like we just talked about, who are not motivated to do anything other than what they're doing, I just worry about the future of education as far as the leadership pipelines. Like I would rather see the money. I know that's part of it, but I'd rather see that focus be in that particular area.
Awesome. Before we wrap up with some more information, would any other panelists like to the opportunity and space to talk about anything they did not get a chance to earlier?
I'll jump in. Um, Hello, everyone. Sorry, my power went out a moment ago. So I kind of missed some of the conversation, which I'm sure was great, and I'll watch the recording. But I've really appreciated hearing the different perspectives on either side, I guess you could say, although we're talking together, but I can kind of see some clear divisions in the thought processes here. I guess just kind of some of my reflections in closing out. I hear that um like NBCT is not a measure of leadership capability. And I think that's a fair statement. I think it's a very fair statement. I don't think it's intended to be. I think that I think instructional leadership is a necessary part of the job of the principalship, but it's not the only part, right? So I think this is one way of measuring that one part of the job. And I don't think it takes away from measuring measuring the job in terms of like, the admin certification or like whatever other metrics districts put in place to measure whether someone's ready to take on the principalship. I'll say like as an instructional coach, I am an NBCT, but me being an NBCT is not something that guarantees I'm gonna be a good instructional coach. There's other training that's involved with being an instructional coach. There's other professional development that I needed to do before and after having gotten this role. So I think my national board helps me understand curriculum and instruction very well, but I don't think it helps me understand coaching very well. I think it's the same thing with the principalship. I think that national board is not going to teach you how to be a bang up job principal, but I think that it does speak to one aspect of the principalship. And I think that's all it was really intended to do. And I don't know that it was necessarily meant to be the end all of all the things about the principalship. So that's kind of one of the things I was thinking. And then the other thing is I think that when we look at this through the lens of how things have been going for years, I think it is a fair statement to say some things would have to change. I don't think there's any expectation that what we've been doing in the state of Maryland, like across the board, is just 100%, oh, the best way it could possibly go, right? So I think that there's an opportunity to reimagine certain things. And if we find that, oh, well, like Mr. Brown was saying, like, teaching a class was hard in the context of how your job was structured. I think it's a reasonable conversation to say like, oh, we should rethink about how jobs are structured. Like, I think that's a reasonable thing to say. Like, even as a coach, my supervisor allowed me to teach a class because I wanted to. But that's not how the coaches typically are. Like, most of the coaches do not teach classes, and they don't want to be honest with you. So my job had to be reimagined because that was a passion of mine. And my supervisor was flexible with me in doing that. I think that we should be, innovative and flexible around the jobs that we have instead of just kind of like saying they should continue the same way because that's where they've been going. So it's just kind of like I guess I'm an optimist type person. So just kind of think of like what's the best case scenario of how this could look in the future. I definitely agree that the way things are right now, some of these things can be challenges, but I'm just hopeful that we can find ways to kind of, chart the best course forward, even if it requires some changes, like to the way things have been going.
Thank you, Justin.
I just want to chime in really quick. Sorry, I'll be brief. Because I do think that that's really what this is ultimately about, is about looking at how we redefine our roles and redefine our structures that we traditionally use. But I want to make sure that everyone is mindful moving forward of the fact that that looks very different in a small rural district like Caroline than it does in, a PG or Montgomery County. And so I think that there really needs to be flexibility, even just with something as as small as the waiver process, there really needs to be flexibility for districts to recognize that different districts have different contexts that they're trying to work within. And I think that as we are given flexibility to look at redefining structures, seeing some models would be really nice, because a lot of what we're given is, I think, maybe even intentionally vague to allow for flexibility. But then we grapple with, how do we make this work in a smaller district where we have one person doing the job of 20 people? And so having some models that would be, just provided, or, just some thought partnering around that rather than just leaving it vague, would be really helpful moving forward to look at those redefinitions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I pass it on to Rachel for more information, Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself and make any comments, thoughts on this topic?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Hicks. I am a National Board Certified teacher, and I'm also on staff at the National Board. So it was really wonderful to hear so much conversation, the robust conversation around opportunities and challenges around the blueprint. I think the work is intended to be really truly transformational, and that creates a lot of challenges, and like, okay, this is the way we've always done things. Here are the new, kind of work that we're leading towards, and that's difficult. It's difficult to navigate because it's complex, it's nuanced, and you're dealing with budget limitations, you're dealing with staffing challenges, you're dealing with student needs, and the needs across the district and across the state, right? So I want to acknowledge that. And this is difficult work to really truly crack into, and it's happening over the course of many years with kind of phased roll in. It's really great to hear that there's flexibility that's being built into these kind of processes with waivers and some additional time, and also the work that you're doing here as a committee is really important, right? Because you're bringing together folks across the state. So it's really wonderful to see the work that's happening, and to be able to just understand the real, true conversations that are happening at the local level. I'll say, as a board certified teacher, the certification process was the best thing that I ever did. I was a new teacher, and I had an NBCT principal who continually came back to me and said, hey, you're doing all this PD. Why don't you think about National Board? And I, kind of pushed him off for a few years. Again, this is just my own professional story, and just said, that's not what I need right now. I really just need to get in, understand what I'm doing, understand my content. And so there was like this constant, he came back to me year after year. Hey, have you thought about this? And it was when I finally sat down and looked at the 5 core propositions that I understand what he was talking about, right? Because I was thinking about board certification as this process, the hoops I needed to jump through, when really, truly, the 5 core propositions made a lot of sense. It didn't look like hoops. It looked like what I should be doing as a teacher. And so when I started to get into the process, I then started to realize all the things that he was talking about in our staff meetings. So when he was talking about understanding our kids, that was core proposition 1. He didn't use that phrase, but he talked about if we truly understood our students and where they were coming from, we could be able to address and truly make big gains that they needed. But we had to identify that, and we had to understand where our students were, right? When we talked about the work of our professional learning communities, well, that's in our 5 core props. And all of the things that he was laying out for us and the way he was leading us as a building and instructional leader, he wasn't using the terms of National Board, but that was his roadmap. And so when I started to look at the process, it made a lot of sense. So that was one of the big, as I was looking at your question 1 tonight, that was one of the big ahas for me, what's the benefit of having an NBCT in a principal role or in an administrative assistant role? And that was it. He had that understanding of the core work that we needed to do with our students, with our teachers, with our communities. And he was able to support us as staff members, as content specialists, as specific humans that were working in the building, dealing with complex situations. He was able to really help support us during the process. When I was going through it, he sat with me and we talked about what I was teaching and what I didn't know and what I needed to understand. He came in and videotaped me. And then we reflected on that and used it as one of my evaluation measures. And so again, just having that NBCT who was a principal really helped build out a deeper understanding for my content and for the students that I was working with. So I know that and understand that, you know, all that sounds sometimes really shiny and happy, but we were dealing with some complex situations, and so are you as administrators, as folks who are working within the districts and within the LEAs, serving in a chief of staff role. All of these things are real. They're real teachers, they're real students that you're engaging with, but having someone who truly understands instructional content and best practices was very helpful for me as a teacher, and also just as a practitioner. I'll also say from the National Board, we're working on developing some additional and building out a true research agenda. So I'm really excited to say that we have some work that's going to be coming out over the next couple of years, trying to understand what does effectiveness look like. And we've also pulled together an interim report based on some of the numbers and some of the changes that we've been seeing since the blueprint was established in Maryland. So looking specifically at teachers working in low performing schools who are pursuing certification. We've looked at teachers across different content areas. We've looked at teachers who are pursuing certification in Maryland, who were teachers of color. We've really seen some positive outcomes so far and increases in interest for teachers who are pursuing certification, and also just the vast number of teachers who are becoming board certified. So all of the numbers that we're seeing are trending up, and it's positive. And while it may take some teachers a few years to pursue and achieve certification, they are learning, they are engaging, and they are becoming a better practitioner as they go through the process, right? Understanding the standards, unpacking the work, and really diving in and being reflective is making big changes and outcomes for some of these teachers within their own pedagogy and practice. So I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be here. If you have questions, we're always happy to engage. We're happy to pull the research that we do have. We're happy to talk about what that looks like and provide some of those, some pieces. So please let us know how we can support you. But just thank you. Thank you for the work sincerely that you're doing. This is tough, transformational work. It's really exciting to see as a person who works out of Arizona and saying, boy, I wish we were tackling some of these same issues and concerns in our state, and knowing that you guys are at the forefront of that work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stacy. Rachel, would you like to talk about your piece now?
Sure. A couple of quick things. Like we could keep talking, I think, for a lot longer, but we're kind of close to the end of our time. So I do want to just kind of quickly summarize a few things. Personally, many of you know that I did also achieve national board as a principal after that. And so I do value the process quite a bit, and I really appreciated the conversation tonight to think about it from many perspectives. And I think, Mr. Liu, first, I want to thank you for engaging in the topic and saying, I'm really curious. I know that there were some times we were picking out the topics this year, how the group, it bubbled up to the top as thinking about the accountability of leaders and teachers, that these were two pieces that were of interest to the group. And really appreciate you pulling together the group tonight to be able to channel the conversation from across the state from so many different perspectives. I think that's the purpose of the advisory committees, is to hear from the people that are actually doing the work and to understand both the challenges and the successes. So many thanks for providing this opportunity tonight. I heard so many things that I want to thumbs up or ones up or, just add on or wish we had more time to talk about. But I think I heard a lot of things that I want to validate and say, like Michael, I think you mentioned the coming and impending administrator shortage. And I will tell you, it is on our minds. Like we at the state level are talking about it and I've been screaming about it for a couple of years, and then it is being discussed. And so it's not, we all are well aware of the teacher crisis and the teacher shortage, but we also recognize that principals also are not staying as long in the principalship, and that the pipelines may not be as full as they used to be. And so definitely something on our mind. And then you layer that in with this conversation about national board. I do want to note that in some of the slides, which we will post, if they're not already posted, I can't remember, you will see a little bit of tweaking of the language, which reflects the way that the law has been interpreted. And we changed the word, there's a language piece of by July 2029 to beginning July 1st, 2029. And so that piece is just a semantics piece, but it's kind of just the fact that after that point, that's when people would need to be nationally board certified. I also want to draw attention to the word newly in that statement. LEAs shall require newly licensed principals. And that was, again, an interpretation of the law. So seated principals are not included in that definition. And those will be clarified in the upcoming Blueprint Comprehensive Plan updates, but they were legal interpretations that came out in digging into the waiver process. Like, what does this legally mean? So along with that, one big thing that I think that I want to close with tonight is that I was sitting back listening and thinking about the theory of action being for the blueprint. And what I was thinking about was all of the interconnectedness of the pillars and how this fits together with each of the other pieces. And I heard so many things tonight, but I think many of you were integral and intentional about centering this work around students, that it's about kids more than it's about teachers or our profession or me as an educator. It's about our impact on our students. And I heard you say that from your opening pieces of why you love the work, that it's impact on students, changing trajectories, it's building the relationships, and that many of you noted that you did feel that being an instructional leader gave you that connection. One of you, who I cannot remember exactly in this moment who it was, but I want to give you a hug, made a connection for me that I hadn't been making, which is as we help our teachers do better at teaching and learning, when we give them constructive feedback, when we coach them and help them grow as professionals, as their administrator, we're also addressing some of those lower level discipline issues. When we make instruction more engaging, we're keeping kids in the classroom. That doesn't mean we're fixing the whole spectrum of discipline challenges that we're seeing, but we're helping our new and beginning teachers, especially, or our struggling teachers, when we're able to lean into the instruction and grow a teacher. And there's kind of a nice parallel. I don't know if any of you were at the leadership trainings last week, but this real-time live feedback was the topic of the Blueprint leadership training that went across the state last week. And so I was just seeing the interconnectedness of that work. But when you really think about it, the entire purpose of the Blueprint is making sure that each and every individual student in this state has a better educational outcome, that we are giving them the tools that they need and the foundation that we need. And I found that as the through line tonight. I just kept hearing pieces of how the administrator serves that role. I do appreciate Sarah and Stacy and one other person mentioned about the need for data and studying, that we don't have that data yet. And so I'm excited, Stacy, to hear about the future of the studies that are coming there, and then any others. We've been mining the research too and recognize that there's just not much out there. There's more on teachers, but less on principals. So many thanks to everyone for being here today, for sharing that. Javon, if we could go through just 2-3 quick slides, we will make these available, but prior to coming into this conversation, we were asked some questions about, can a principal actually get national board certification? Could go up one more. Yes, this one. Sorry, I've got a chatty dog who's mad right now. One more back. The other way. There we go. Can a principal really become nationally board certified? I think you heard it today. Many of the folks here, it sounds like you did achieve before becoming an administrator, but we did just want to clarify that current administrators can actually become nationally board certified. We've heard that it's not possible and wanted to make sure that you know that it is. These slides will be available if you want to read all the fine print there, but it is essentially the exact same process as teachers, and you borrow kids. So I had to borrow students when I recertified for my renewal in my 10th year, because that's what it was back in the dark ages. But it is entirely possible. You pick the certification area of your choice that you have access to students in, and you can borrow students, you can co-teach. I think we heard somebody say they did intervention groups. Next slide. This is just a little bit of information about what the process looks like to give everybody that perspective. People on this call, you know it. People listening may not. That the full experience is 4 10-page papers and 1 exam. It's a very different type of writing than what most college students are used to writing. It is not a college paper that you're writing, but it's a reflective paper. It's teaching you to reflect on your practice. It does include, I believe, 2 videos. That's my guess there. I was trying to triple check that. Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong. But again, you're taking a picture, taking a video of your class and reflecting on what you as an educator are doing and responding to what's happening in the teaching and learning process at that time. And then there's the 1 exam that you take at a scary facility where you go and you're all nervous and have to take the test that's in your content area. So I was the same, I believe, as Mr. Liu, early adolescent mathematics, and actually with Justin too, right? All of us. And so we were tested on our content and on being able to teach that content, like looking at a student example of work and being able to identify their thinking, their error in thinking, and what we would do as an educator to correct that. 1 more slide. The process can be done in 1 full year. Again, I was from the dark ages. We had to do it in 1 full year with the opportunity to renew, or you can bank your scores. You can do 1 at a time and bank them. You have to attempt all within the first 3 years, and you have 2 years to be able to be able to renew or to edit and revise and resubmit those. I think there's 1 more slide. Challenges. We know there's plenty more that you could fit on here, and we could expand on this list after today's conversation. We recognize that time is one of the biggest challenges to everything, and that administrators have a multitude of responsibilities. They're hiring, they're making sure that the building's clean, they're making sure that the playground's safe, they're training, they're coaching, they're working with parents and community members. There's a million things on an administrator's plate. So we recognize that that is also a challenge. And then also you've got to commit to have consistent access to kids. Like, you can't call a kid like, hey, you in the red shirt, when you're talking to them on video. You need to know who they are. You need to understand how they think. You need to know those kids. But the big idea that we just wanted to make sure is that it is possible for a current seated school administrator to achieve national board certification. And that was a concern that we had previously heard a lot of misunderstanding about. Any questions on the logistics and nuts and bolts? I think this is a group that probably knows most of this, but we just wanted to make sure that the public had this information as well. Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for bringing this topic, so much life to the topic. There's so much to think about and so much to wonder about as we're moving forward. On one of my slides somewhere, there is a mention about the waiver process, and I do want to just draw your attention that on Thursday, the 17th, like 4 o'clock-ish, the Maryland State Board is having one of their subcommittees on education policy, and the waiver, it's my understanding, may be a topic. I don't know what the conversation is going to be, but I do think it might be discussed. And those are videotaped. You can catch them live or after the fact on the Maryland State Department of Education website. So this is a very timely topic, and we appreciate all the context you brought to it tonight. Mr. Liu?
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Last thing, Amy, would you like to close out our meeting today?
Sure. Good evening. Before we close, I want to echo Rachel and Lou's heartfelt thanks to our incredible panelists for today's discussion. Your insights brought a real depth to our conversation as a committee, as well as the AIB about national board certification and the intersection with administration. The perspectives you shared on the challenges, successes, and importance of leadership pathway and elevating educator quality are incredibly invaluable as we continue to build a stronger, more equitable system here in Maryland. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your candor and for the work you do every day in service of Maryland students and educators. As we look ahead to our next meeting, which will be August 11th, we'll be turning our attention to something quite foundational and a little bit of a shift. And that is public engagement and communication. So two aspects that we'll be tackling this meeting. One about communicating results. So what are the communication about the impact of initiatives and the status of Blueprint's implementation to the public, so we can ensure transparency. We'd love to invite districts to discuss what is something that came up during our ERTs, our expert review team meetings, which is what is reasonable to share both publicly and with the families of the students that are in the schools receiving those ERTs. What works and what are examples of what districts are doing to share information that we may bring to light. So specifically in that meeting, we'll explore some of the original intent behind the commission's recommendations around partnering with families and communities, why it was prioritized, what it looks like, but then also what are the pieces that and the systems in place for engaging communities in some of this education reform, whether that be through public meetings, surveys, advisory groups, etc. So we're excited to learn from those who are doing this work on the ground and to collectively reflect on how we can continue to align with the spirit of Blueprint as it was originally imagined. So thank you again. For those committee members that would like to be on the planning meeting for August, we would ask you to sign up. And sorry, I had the I had the link to the sign up sheet and then I lost power, so I lost the link. So let me put that in the chat really quickly, and you'll scroll down to number 6, public engagement and communication, that we're slated to tackle on August 11th. And if you would like to be part of that planning meeting, please sign up. For those of you from districts, if you have examples of what your district is doing to share information with families and communities, we would be all ears and would love to hear more and spotlight them and showcase them. So I don't know about y'all, but we are getting some crazy storms here. So in Anne Arundel. So please stay safe and hope you stay dry. And we'll see you in August. Enjoy the rest of your July. Thank you.